Okay, what time is it? Parsha Slichos. Here we go. Tanis Esther, Sobatevis. Okay, 7:30. So there's a few things that we need to discuss. Very topical, of course, being that the Hebrew date today, Wednesday, which is already after Nacht, which is, of course, Thursday's date, which is the 9th of Teves, which you may think, oh, what's the 9th of Teves? We all know the 10th of Teves is a fast day, but the Gemara tells us that the 8th, 9th, and 10th could all have been made into a fast day. They all had terrible things that happened on those days. So let's discuss them briefly. But before, let's remind everybody that Friday, yes, I said Friday, is a fast day, Asar B'Teves. In fact, I should have got it here from the Tamim and Hagim and others, say that if Asar B'Teves fell out on a Shabbos, which it cannot do in the current calendar, we would fast on that Shabbos, just like we do on Yom Kippur. In some ways, it's easy to say that when it can't fall on a Shabbos, but because it's such a special, such a sad day, and also it talks about it says Bo, that they did it on that day, so not any other day, that day, so it has to be fasting on that day. But it can fall out on a Friday, so we do fast on a Friday. When you're moving a fast, so Tanis Esther, this year should be a Shabbos, so we don't fast on Shabbos. So when you have to move it, you don't move it to Friday, you move it to Thursday. The other fasts you push off later because you don't want to bring punishments earlier. Tanis Esther is not really a punishment. You can't move it later because it's Purim, so you have to bring it earlier. But Shabbat, Tammuz, and Tisha B'Av don't bring it earlier. Why are we bringing sadness earlier? So we push those off, okay, until Sunday. This year, Tisha B'Av is really a Sunday. What do I mean by really a Sunday? It actually falls on a Sunday. It's not Shabbos and pushed off. It actually falls on a Sunday because it's the same day, of course, as the first day of Pesach, which is also a Sunday. So this week, we are going to be fasting on Friday, those who would obviously be fasting anyway. So we're fasting Friday, and of course you say the Slichos in the morning. And for Mincha, you lay and you say the Haftorah. You don't do the Avinu Malkeinu, you don't do Tachnon because it's Erev Shabbos. And you fast into Shabbos until nightfall. And, which, if I remember correctly, is 6:19 here, that 6:11 we have the fast going out here. And, of course, Friday night you can't eat or drink without making Kiddush. So here in our shul, we took a vote last Friday night. We decided we're going to daven Mincha at 5. And that means that by the time we finish Mincha, we'll daven Ma'ariv and all that stuff, there is still about 20 minutes left of the fast. So it's enough time for people to get home. And you have 18:24. Okay,
18:16.
I did 18:11. Is the 26 minutes after sunset that I take out fast days. Shabbos this week goes out 6:19, so it's 8 minutes before. But there are different levels of sunset, of nightfall that you can use for various things. So we are fasting Friday, which means, according to the halacha that we have it, there are opinions that say if you need to taste Shabbos food, there are things you can taste it and spit it out, but none of these things are advisable, okay? So really one should make sure that if you're preparing food that you need to taste, or you're worried about the smell of the food upsetting you, make sure that you prepare it on Thursday. I saw a fascinating shaila. So we know on Shabbos, we're not supposed to take drugs, pills, unless you absolutely have to. And fast days, okay? You're not supposed to have water. The pill itself is not an issue. So what about people? I'm in this situation as well. When I take pills on a Shabbos, but what I usually do is I take them early, before Shabbos on a Friday, before Shabbos comes in, for my high cholesterol, in case you're wondering. I take it before Shabbos comes in, and then on Motzei Shabbos, I take it after Shabbos goes out. So therefore, I don't actually have to take it on Shabbos. I sandwich it between them. So what do you do in a case like Friday? Because you've got the fast day, and then you've got the Shabbos. Shabbos really is a real thing, not chas v'shalom, a real thing. It's not what I'm trying to say. But you could say that the idea of taking pills on Shabbos is more of a stringent idea than having a pill on a Friday. Now, taking a pill itself is not an issue on a fast day because it's not considered a food item, right? Same way as if you went outside and ate mud or dirt or pulled leaves off the trees and you ate them. That's not considered eating. Even on Yom Kippur, you have to eat food. You have to eat something that's considered edible. So a pill is not considered edible. The issue, of course, is if you can do it without taking the water. So if you can do it without taking the water, without drinking, then they say it is better to take the pill on the fast day just before, you would take it before Shabbos comes in, because then you're better taking it on the fast day than the Shabbos. But obviously, if that's difficult for you, you take it on the Shabbos, or heteru, if you take every day a pill, that you can't take them on a Shabbos. But that certainly poses a interesting conundrum. So, I wanted to say the three things that we have. So, Shabbat Teves, the 10th of Teves, is actually, fascinatingly, a difference of opinion as to what we are fasting for. So, there is a pasuk. So we know, this is not conjecture. There is a pasuk, in a good way, that says, Soim Haravi, the fast of the 4th month, right? Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, that's the fast of Tammuz. Tzom HaChamishi, the fast of the 5th month, which is Av. Tzom HaShavi, that's Tzom Gedalia. And Tzom HaAsiri, and the Tzom of the 10th month, which is the month of Teves, will be turned into happy days. So we know it's clearly brought down that there is a fast day in the 10th month. That's brought down because it says these fast days are going to turn into wonderful days. So the question is, what is these fast days? So if you look in Jewish history, if you look in Tanakh, you will see there are two things that happened on the 10th of Teves. One happened before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, and one happened after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So to be very brief, and I surmised and wrote this in my newsletter article for this week, just the basic brief history. So Nebuchadnezzar, right, he came and he wanted to take over Yerushalayim. He wanted to destroy the Beis HaMikdash, he wanted to take Yerushalayim and make it into a vassal state, which he did. Then his guy put in he rebelled, and Nebuchadnezzar came and said, right, he took off a whole load of people to Golos. Who was taken then? 2 people. Well, thousands of people. 2 people of note. Mordechai, from the Purim story, as we know, Asher Hegla, Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel, that he took people, I think it was 11 years before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. He took him. He also took Yechezkel, was also, the Navi Yechezkel, he was also taken, and he was in Babel at the time. So there was already a whole exile that was taken before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. He got rid of that king, and he put Tzidkiyahu in charge. Again, 11 years later, Tzidkiyahu rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar said, right, that's it. I've had enough of this now. He's coming. And he laid siege to Yerushalayim on the 10th of Teves. And then eventually on a Shiva also with Tammuz, he burst through. And then, of course, on Tisha B'Av, he destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. So, that's the first thing that happened. That's terrible, because this was the start. When he came finally to siege Yerushalayim, that was the start of all the troubles. Because if it wasn't for that siege, there would be no destruction of Yerushalayim, no destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, no destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, no destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, no troubles that we're in today, of course. So therefore, everything is predicated on the surrounding of Yerushalayim on the 10th of Teves. Then there's something else that happened on the 10th of Teves. After the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed on the 9th of Av, it took 5 months after Elul, Tishri, Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves. 5 months from when they destroyed it in the 9th of Av till it reached Bavel. It reached the people in Bavel on the 10th of Teves. They heard about it. That was like a huge mourning, and they ripped their clothes and they fasted on that day. In the same way as if somebody doesn't know one of their relatives died, and they hear about it, it's called the Shmura Rechoka, after 30 days have passed, you hear the relative has died, you're supposed to sit Shiva for a day. And a day, of course, in Yiddishkeit becomes a few hours, because, we shorten everything, right? Just like the last day of Shiva becomes just a few minutes. So the same with this, basically, you person sits Shiva for just a few minutes. And this is something very useful trick, and I say trick, that they use for people who have dementia or other issues that would make it very difficult for them to sit Shiva. They don't tell them, because they wouldn't know anyway, because they're not of that sound mind necessarily, until after 30 days, and then they don't really have to sit Shiva or do any of that stuff anyway. So that's a trick that people use. So those are those 2 reasons that people say Asar V'Teves was commemorated as a fast day. So what happened on the 9th? and what happened on the 8th. Now, in the Shulchan Aruch, it says he doesn't know what happened on the 9th. But everybody agrees, because the Gemara talks about it in Megillah, that, and it's, today we have all this English translation of everything, right? Siddur, Chumash, Art Scroll, everything. But that was the first time that the Torah was translated
into Greek.
That time was into Greek, yeah, but out of Hebrew, right? You talk about the Hanukkah story. The Hanukkah story, we know we beat the Greeks. The Greeks had control in one form or another over Yerushalayim, over Yiddishkeit for nearly 120 years. From when Alexander the Great came to conquer Yerushalayim and refused when he saw Shimon HaTzadik and he stopped, but that influence still stayed. People, right? Look at these great rabbis' names. All of a sudden we have in Pirkei Avos, who took over from Shimon HaTzadik? Antigonus is Socher. He was a great tzaddik, the Gemara says. He was one of the greatest giants of rabbinic leadership, but his name was Antigonus, which is a Greek name. So Greek culture was already infiltrating Yiddishkeit. It was already becoming prevalent.
Alexander is Greek.
Right, okay. And they wanted, Talmai, I think, wanted to translate the Torah into Greek. And it was terrible. Why? Think about, and one of the big references that the Christians have beaten the Jews about over the years is for one of the references in this week's Parsha about Yoshki and Mashiach and everything. But anyway, that's not the topic of tonight. But once you translate the Torah, you dilute it, and you access it, you make it accessible to all people, and now, they can see what's in the Torah, and of course they've used it against us over the centuries to beat us with. So that was considered a very, very sad day, and they wanted to make that a fast day. The 9th of Teves, as I said, Shulchan Aruch says doesn't know what was so bad about the 9th of Teves, but if you look, I'll show it in the video, if you look in the Slichos that we say on Asar B'Teves, which in the Art Scroll City was on page 848, it goes through Eskra Motzok Asher Kora'ani, I shall recall the distress that befell me. With 3 blows he struck me this month. He cut me down, pushed me away, and caused me pain. But now he has exhausted me. I suppose it's a bit hypothetical to read it in English when we're talking about the terrible tragedy of translating the Torah. But you'll have to bear with me, I'm afraid. He surrounded me on its 8th with darkness left and right. For these 3 events, I instituted a fast. The Grecian king forced me to translate the Torah into Greek. On my back, the plowers plowed and lengthened their furrows. That's a play on the words of the Pasuk. I was reproached on the 9th of this month with humiliation and disgrace. Removed from me was the mantle of majesty and diadem. On this day was torn away the giver of beautiful works, Ezra the scribe. Ezra HaSofer, who, if anybody did the Daf Yomi today, the Gemara talks about Ezra HaSofer and his greatness. And the Gemara says Ezra HaSofer was on a par with Moshe Rabbeinu, and he could have been the one to give the Torah to Klal Yisrael, but Moshe Rabbeinu beat him to it. That's what the Gemara says. Moshe Rabbeinu beat him to it by by 1,000 years. By about 1,000 years, just under. He beat him to it. 900, beat him to it. And therefore, Moshe gave the Torah. So that just tells you all about Ezra. But then it says, but Ezra still was able to change the Torah a little bit. He changed the writing of the Torah. There's supposed to be a different script. I was Googling it today to see it. The Gemara talks about it, and I can't make head or tail of it. Ksav Ivri, the old way of writing Hebrew, they say. Anyway, that's another huge discussion, but not for now. So he changed the letters of the Torah, how it's written today. These letters were not, according to the Gemara, the same letters that were Moshe Rabbeinu had.
It's still readable. Your son can read Hebrew if you showed him something from the second.
I couldn't. Era. No, the second temple are these letters.
Yeah, okay.
But I looked at the old Hebrew language, as Ksav Ivri is called. I couldn't make head or tail of it. I couldn't work it out. I couldn't work out which letters it was. And then there's another apparently language even before the Ksav Ivri where letters are pictures and so on. I couldn't make head or tail of that either. So again, you can go and Google that and so on. So there were 3 terrible things. The Torah was translated into Greek, and if you look in the Gemara, it's a fascinating story, because the Gemara says, what did he do? Oh, it was actually the Egyptian king Ptolemy II. Here I'm reading from the Art Scroll notes. that Egyptian king Ptolemy II got 70 Jewish sages to force to translate the Torah into Greek. So yeah, he got 70 people, and there was a great miracle, the Gemara says. Why? Because they decided to make 6 changes to the Torah's translation. And each one of these rabbis changed it exactly the same way. So therefore, he wouldn't say, oh, why is it different, and so on and so forth. Now, that's amazing, because if you get, 20 people in a room and tell them to translate words, they'll all translate them differently, right? It's quite funny. My daughter comes home with homework and translations. So when she asks me translations, I translate it different to the way her Rebbe has, right? Because you use different nuances and different English and, and so on to translate words. So one of the 6 that I remember was Bereshis bara Elokim, which is very ambiguous, because if you translate it literally, it sounds like this Mr. Bereshis fellow, bara Elokim, he created God, which is a terrible thing to say. So they couldn't translate that literally, so they said, Borishon, at the beginning of creation, God created, so therefore he changed it. Also, one of the names of the non-kosher animals was the name of this king's wife. So they changed that name because they didn't want to think, oh, we're laughing at him putting a non-kosher animal, the name of his wife. Also, when it says Sarah laughed, Bekirba, which sounds terrible to Sarah. Why is she laughing? She's denying God. We didn't want everyone to know that. They changed it to Vatischak Sarah Bekroveho. Sarah laughed with her friends, like, woohoo! And they changed that. What else did they change? They changed a few other things that I just can't remember. Those are 3 out of the 6, I think. They changed them to make them a little bit more understandable to the general public. So those are 3 things. It is a very serious fast, not so long, although it's longer in Florida than it is in New York, although it's shorter in Florida than it is in Australia, but be that as it may, so it is a fast, and those who are physically able to do so should fast on Friday. Okay, what time is it? Okay, so this week's Parsha is Vayechi. And Vayechi literally translates as, and he lived, and refers to Yaakov Avinu, last will and testament, you could say. In fact, I did say that in my newsletter writing. And he is coming close to his dying, his deathbed. He's on his deathbed, and he calls Yosef, and he makes various demands, and then he gives blessings to his children, and then he dies. And Yosef takes him up to Mount Machpelah, buries him, comes back down. Some fascinating things about that. There was a big war, according to the Medrash, right, between Esav and the children of Yaakov, and so on and so forth. That's how Rome started, according to Rabbeinu Bechaye. And then, of course, Yosef dies at the end of the Parsha. So because Yaakov is instructing his children what to do, so we have lots of people dying in the Torah, but they just died, okay? They died. We have him, he did. Vayomos, he died. Even Avraham Avinu got to 175, he died. Yitzchak, he died. Sarah, she died. But Yaakov is different, because Yaakov is a whole process to his death. That is a whole Parsha. He leaves instructions, what to do with him, how to go about it. So that's why the National Association of Chevra Kadishas picks Parshas Vayechi to be their annual awareness Shabbos, and I have taken part. The Delray Torah Center is included in that, and they want people to talk about certain things. Every year they give out different ideas and so on. I don't believe we have to talk about the problems of cremation, Baruch Hashem, because I don't think that's something we have to talk about, although I did go to a issue before, but I wasn't successful with somebody, and I got a heter from the Rav in Baltimore. What's he called now? The English rabbi is the head of the stockade. His name's just gone out of my head. Rabbi Heinemann. Yeah. So they were having a prayers at the house where the guy died, and he was going to be cremated in 2 weeks. And he said, yeah, it's mutter to go and to do that and say some prayers, whatever, and try and see if you can save it, but wasn't able to, because at that point, they told me in Florida, the law is that everybody has to sign off on it, all the children. So I was like, great, tell the children not to sign off on it, we won't be cremated. But they'd already all signed off on it. And by that time, it's too late. Anyway, so we don't need to talk about the issues of cremation. I did, over the years, talk about not being buried in a crypt, an above-ground crypt. Although I was at a funeral on Monday in Weston, and I had a thought, which I should really speak to the rabbi of the National Association of Chevra Kadishas about. I should ask him, because, and I wrote it in my newsletter, that one should be buried in the ground as opposed to one of these crypts, above-ground crypts. And he was telling me one of the things talks about there, Anyway, you know what? We won't talk about it because it will. It's quite gruesome. But anyway, I just had a thought about something with the stuff. We'll rather leave that unsaid about the crypts and stuff. Anyway, and some of the gruesomeness with that. So one of the things I want to talk about, a big topic of mine, and I've had a lot of difficult experience with this, is called the Halachik Medical Directive. Now, if you go on the National Association Council of Chevra Kadisha, you have all the resources. You can print it out for each state. This one is specific for Florida. In my newsletter this week, I have put a link to do it, and it's very important. I have done it for a few people, and I'm going to talk about that for a few minutes because that's very important. So, Yaakov in this week's Parsha, he brings his children, and he commands them what to do, and tells them what to do after his death, and so on. But that's all after death. But what about before death? Because, leaving aside various countries, England included now, that just passed a new law recently, Canada, I believe, that has now rights to die laws that they just introduced. Leaving aside all of that, there is a difference of opinion between what the halacha states and what is common medical practice procedure. I can't begin to tell you the stories. I worked in a nursing home for 8 years. In fact, I had one case about 6 years ago. The guy was so powerful, so strong, I couldn't believe it. If it wasn't for him, and he refused. They wanted to get rid of this woman, and he refused steadfastly and whatever. And in the end, this woman lived another 8 months. She got better from that stuff. They lied to him. They said, "Oh, you give her a trach, she'll never be able to speak again." They lied like you wouldn't believe. And then when we got to the doctor who did the trach, eventually he said, "Of course she'll be able to talk normally." And she was sitting up. She was fine for 8 months. And she got another infection and died of that. But she lived another 8 months, could have lived longer. And then they told me, as the rabbi, because he called me in, we were there with the people, I had to sign. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. This is MS Lamita. This is truth. They gave me a paper, wrote out that I, Rabbi Saunders, agree and sign that this woman should be left in the terrible state of pain that she is in. I don't believe they wrote it. It was terrible. I was involved with seasons that they wanted to open up in West Palm Beach, and they wanted me to give speeches for them, and in the end, they got closed down. Only Trustbridge was allowed. They were trying to have fair commission. And I said to them, wait a minute, but you have to know how to handle Jewish events, Jewish, end-of-life care. So, leaving aside the halachos of the end-of-life care, which is very difficult when and why not, whatever, that's beyond the debate of this, necessarily. But what I want to talk about is the Halachik Medical Directive, because if a person goes in and is not able to speak for themselves, not able to do for themselves, you have a health proxy that can speak to you. But a lot of people have, from a more religious views than perhaps their children and grandchildren. A lot of people have that. They may be more religious than their children and grandchildren. And therefore that can pose a problem, because whilst you want XYZ to happen, your next of kins may be like, no, we don't necessarily agree that those things should be done, right? So that's that. So they came up with this idea called the Halachik Medical Directive. This is all in law, that's why by each state. So this is a legal document. And what this does, let's go through a little bit of it together. Those who are online now watching, if you want to go to the NACSK website, that's National Association, NASCK of Chevra Kadisha, and then you click on the website, National Association Council of Chevra Kadisha, and you'll see, if you click on some of the resources where it talks about halachic wills, medical halachic will, end-of-life wills, and so on and so forth. You will see it. You can click on it. You can read everything, and you can pull up a copy of this, click in your state, and we can go through this together. So before we read all this jargon, the basics of it is you have a designate of healthcare surrogate, right? The person you have, surrogate, alternate surrogate, which is by law you name somebody who's going to be there. And then you have additional instructions. So this is normal. This is the important bit, additional instructions. So let's read this. Jewish law to govern healthcare decisions. I am Jewish. It is my desire, and I hereby direct that all healthcare decisions made for me, whether by my surrogate, a guardian appointed for me, or any other person, must be pursuant to Jewish law and custom as determined in accordance with strict Orthodox interpretation and tradition. Without limiting in any way the generality of the foregoing, it is my wish that Jewish law and custom should dictate the course of my healthcare with respect to such matters as the performance of cardiopulmonary resuscitation, if I suffer cardiac or respiratory arrest, the performance of life-sustaining surgical procedures, and the initiation of maintenance of any particular course of life-sustaining medical treatment or other form of life support maintenance, including the provision or nutrition and hydration, the criteria by which death shall be determined, including the method by which such criteria shall be medically ascertained or confirmed, because we have different views on when is the end of life, when is considered death. 3. Ascertaining the requirements of Jewish law. In determining the requirements of Jewish law and custom in connection with my declaration, I direct my surrogate to consult with the following Orthodox rabbi, and I ask my surrogate to follow his advice. And you put name of rabbi, address, telephone, evening, cell, page of beeper. If such Orthodox rabbi is unable, unwilling, or unavailable to provide such consultation and guidance, then I direct my agent to consult with, and I ask my agent to follow the guidance of the following Orthodox rabbi. Next names. If both of these Orthodox rabbis are unable, unwilling, or unavailable to provide such consultation and guidance, then I direct my agent to consult with, and I ask my agent to follow the guidance of an Orthodox rabbi referred by the following Orthodox Jewish institution or organization. And then you put the organization on there. So basically, this is a way of ensuring that your end-of-life issues will be handled according to halacha. Now, I've signed these for people. It was amazing whilst Tendler was alive, because he was an expert, and I called him many times. I probably still have his number on my phone, fortunately. And he was nifter or whatever, and I called him many times about Shiloh's end of life and so on and so forth. In fact, when I was in Israel for the Mizrahi Conference 75th anniversary of Israel, we had a great talk by Tzohar. They gave me all the Sepharim and everything, end of life issues. The rabbi was amazing. And I said to him, I'd love to get you over to Florida to speak. He said, yes, but it's going to cost $4,000 to bring him over, him and the other guy. And so far, nobody has agreed to pay for that. But that would be an amazing thing. It wouldn't be just something I would limit to here for 10, 15 people. You know, you could potentially get a whole big end-of-life conference, get a couple of other rabbis, fill up a huge place, 1,000 people, because these are the experts that have been in it and everything, you know, how to treat parents, switching off, not switching off, all that sort of stuff, which we're not going to discuss now. But that could be something, if somebody wants to donate that for the future, that would be amazing. But this is very important. And if you go, those who are on the website, you'll also see they produce cards. So once you've done this, you send this off, they will send you with a little card, which I didn't have in the other shul, but I don't have it with me now, where you have it in your wallet. So therefore, chas v'shalom, if somebody's brought in and they're on a, they don't know these hell, how do they know who this health hoxie is, right? Who knows? But if you have it in your pocket, in a little card, they can pull it out, they see straight away, and they know what the situation is. My advice to you is, and I say this to people, so let's say Rebbe Tendler, he's not alive now, but you want to get the best advice, great. But a lot of very busy rabbis at the basins, of course, don't answer their phones all the time. And this is critical, right? Because if these rabbis don't answer the phones at the time of need, it's very difficult. So I always advise you to at least have one of the rabbis. You know, you want to have your great rabbis and the people who are experts, fine. But have somebody, I'm not saying you have to choose me or whatever, but have a local rabbi, certainly that knows you a little bit, preferably, but somebody that you could be reasonably assured is not as busy as some of these top rabbis. If everybody puts in the phone, right, Reb Heinemann from the Starkey, it's going to be a problem, right? Because, So that's my advice. You have 3 opportunities. You've got 2 rabbis to put down, and then you have an organization. But we know, okay? We know at the time that it's difficult. People need decisions, right? Sometimes you have a few minutes, a few hours. Fine. Sometimes it may just be 10 minutes, 15 minutes, right? Somebody's rushed in. What do? Do we start an IV on? Do we start him on life support machine, right? Because once they're on life support, getting off halachically is very difficult. If you don't put them on in the first place, from a halachic point of view, it's easier to allow somebody to slip away. So there are many different issues with that. So these things, you don't have much time, right? Do you put them on? Do you not put them on? It's quick, 1, 2, 3. So it's something that's, I always advise people, choose at least one of the rabbis, and preferably the first rabbi, because that's someone they're going to call, right? You're going to tell me they're going to sit there calling 1, 2, and then organization. So the first rabbi should be somebody that you could be look. people don't answer the phone at the best of times. They're busy, davening, shiurim, of course. But somebody that you can be reasonably assumed that is not, busy off there, like crazy busy with stuff, right? So that's one piece of advice. And it is very important because I have seen with my own eyes, okay? I've seen with my own eyes how and that's why they say, you can be mechalel Shabbos on Shabbos. You can drive, if you can get an Uber, it's better, but you can be on Shabbos with somebody who's dying, a relative. Why? Because if you're not there on Shabbos, the people around, you don't know what they're going to get away with, right? So by being there, you could potentially even just lengthen somebody's life, even by a few minutes, whatever. So it's important, and so on. That's why it's important, and they allow people to be Machalel Shabbos because that's considered Pekuach Nefesh. Because nowadays you don't know what they're going to do. Oh, no family around. Oh, sorry, we're so sorry it happened. We couldn't do anything, right? Sometimes I've heard that. So that's why on Shabbos it's permitted. This is all I'm talking about in general terms now, of course, and so on. Why it's permitted on Shabbos to be there with somebody, to even drive down there, because it's if somebody's broken their leg and they're just sitting there, it's different. But we're talking about somebody who's very ill and all that sort of stuff. It's very, very important because people will get away with stuff. People are only too happy. And when I came to this country, I realized something else, and they admitted this to me. And I don't want to say exactly the truth, because I may be getting this wrong, but they were saying to me something about people who are ill. I think it was 10 days. One of the people admitted to me, after 10 days, that's when the money ratio per patient goes down, and therefore they try and kick them out. They try and get them out of the hospital, because now you've been there 10 days, we're now not making money, because the money goes down per day, and once they die, so they try and get them off into hospice, and then hospice, of course, also the same sort of thing. So you have to be very careful. There is a financial component in America, because everybody needs to make money. The insurance companies want to make money, right? In England, you don't have that business, the NHS, so nobody cares, right, from the money side of it. Yeah, but but nobody cares about the costs, right? The nurses, the doctors. Yeah, but he's not there. That's what I mean. Here in America, the people in the hospital, right? They're probably on commissions for So that's another component, right? The financial cost of things. So you have to be very careful. So I am a huge advocate of this advanced directive for healthcare. So if that's one thing you can take away from tonight's shir, please go ahead and set that up. They have written this out very easily for you to understand exactly what to do. You write your name, your address, your telephone number. It's very easy. And if you have a lawyer that handles your estate, and so on, you get your witnesses, right? It's very simple. They have it all written out that you can follow. If you have a document with your wills and all this sort of stuff, right? You keep it with those documents. If you have a lawyer or whatever you have, make sure they are aware of it, right? And again, if you have children and other people, they need to be aware of it. They don't necessarily need to be aware of how much money you're leaving them or what the details are of the will, but these type of things they need to know. You need to know where it is. They need to know what it says in it, because they're the ones who, Chas v'shalom, when the time comes, will need to know these information. As I say, when we talk about wills, also there's on this website there are Halachik wills about ways that you can make a will halachically acceptable. Again, that's not the topic that I want to get into tonight, but again, those people who are going down that direction and sitting down on planning is something that the children need to know, the end of life provisions. Now, not only do they need to know this, they need to know all your arrangements, okay? You know how many times I've been with people in the middle of the night for 2 hours, people just died, and they have arrangements. So you don't have to worry, because if they don't have arrangements, it's very... we do it. But then and then they need to know social security numbers and all these sort of things, because you have to do the documents for the state. So all of a sudden they're asking you all these difficult questions at the time of So I always tell everybody, just from that point of view alone. In fact, it's probably a good thing from a chesed point of view to relieve that decision from your loved ones, right? Because it's a difficult time enough, even with arrangements. So that's one reason to go ahead and do it. But they need to know. But you need to make people aware well, these arrangements are. In England, it's different because you get buried through the shul. That's how it works. The shul owns the burial plots. You're a member of the shul, you're buried. So it's easy. You're a member of the shul, good, we do it, excellent, everything's fine. But here, which cemetery are you going up north? You're not going up north to Connecticut, this, that, the other, right? Especially snowbirds. People need to know arrangements because otherwise it's like, oh, was it in this cemetery? Did they change it to down here? And seriously, I've had these issues. In fact, I know if one person got buried in the wrong grave, and they asked the Shaila, they were able to, then he said no, they were able to halachically transport it. That's another story I don't want to get involved in. I know of...
Emptying the graves in Asa in 2005.
Right, okay, yeah,
That's another issue.
right, that's something again. But, people buried in the wrong graves. So, it's very important, right? The arrangements, end-of-life situation, and funeral arrangements must be known. You must know your children, your wife, they must know what the arrangements are because sometimes time is of the essence. And something very important also got burnt with a few years ago. Somebody passed away and said, yeah, Rabbi, we got all the arrangements, I got Connecticut, we got the burial, the funeral home. Oh, great. We called it the funeral home. I said, wait a minute. You arranged everything when you were living in Connecticut. Now you're living in Florida. You don't have any provisions to get from Florida to Connecticut. And we were like, ooh, we managed to raise some money, Baruch Hashem, and we're able to sort it out. So, for snowbirds, you may have made arrangements many years ago thinking, I'm good. But now you've moved. Or, you may not have moved full time, but if you're a snowbird and chas v'shalom, something happens while you're down here, then you need to have extra provisions of knowing what's going to happen from here to get back there. So, when I had medical insurance from England, what's it called, travel insurance for the first couple of years till I became a citizen and everything, included in that was repatriation, right? So, you got to make sure that you know how and where and what. That doesn't mean you know the flights. I'm not talking about, but I'm talking about who is in charge, who you call, where the numbers are, and if you've added on those provisions of getting somewhere. That's something very important, catches a lot of people out, right? Number 2, conversations to have. Even if you don't go ahead and decide your arrangements, you have to decide where you're going to get buried. Because if you don't decide where you're going to get buried, and there are several options, right? I'm not talking about going to Israel. I'm talking about people who used to live up north, people whose family are up north, but they're down here. People who may have 1 or 2 kids. People who have the wife's family are buried in X cemetery, the husband's family. So it's very important. If you don't discuss these things and you don't know, how on earth do you expect your loved ones and children after the time, in such a crazed time, to decide and make a decision? So even if you don't want to go ahead and make arrangements and pay for things, right, which some people are, don't want to do, they find it too reluctant, fine. But you have to at least make a decision as to where you want to be buried, if you have multiple choices. Which cemeteries, some people may have family plots, right? And I'm not going into the halachik things that wives should be buried in the husband's plot, or first wives, second wives, all this sort of stuff. Yeah, it can get messy from a halachik point of view, but at the end of the day, you have to sit down and you have to make a decision, right? Especially people who've been married 2 times, 3 times, whatever it is. There are different things, right? Somebody once told me, he said, I don't care what the halacha said. He said, I've been married 50 years to my first wife. He said, my second wife was a marriage. He didn't say convenience, but, they were in their 8, He said, so my first wife is my major wife. Fair enough, and the halacha would recognize that, because that was. So you have to know, you have to make a decision. So if anything that you take away from today is that you are in charge of your decisions, but you have to make the decisions.
You can't make them anymore.
Right, exactly. So therefore, you have to do this ahead of time to make sure that they are in plans. At least people know what's going on, where you want to be buried. And again, if you want to go to Israel, which you may or may not want to go, it was one of the topics I had planned to talk about tonight, and a whole lot of printouts, but time seems to have got away from us. I'm not saying to anybody that they should go and be buried in Israel at all. In fact, if you look, just to summarize my half an hour drush that I was going to come down into 2 minutes, I'm going to read out from Reb Henkin and from Reb Weiss, all say that yes, there may be a benefit of being buried in Israel, which again is subject to a couple of interesting points. It seems to be according to everybody, if you die in Israel, you should definitely be buried in Israel. That's clear. But if you're not buried in Israel, to come to Israel, that's some people say that's not a thing at all. The Zohar says you shouldn't do it, but now they say that it's not so. I can imagine if everybody goes to Israel and so on. Rabbi Henkin said, the Gemara says that Rabbi Lezer said when he was buried, he wanted to be left in a basic, that's why we now get buried in basic shrouds, because people were spending thousands of dollars on or whatever shekels they were using on gold stuff, and people couldn't afford it. They would just leave their dead in the street and run off because they couldn't afford to be buried. So he said, with me, simple coffin, simple everything, and that's what they did. And then afterwards they dropped the prices. He said the same was with Israel. All of a sudden now it's becoming so expensive. Everybody's one. So you see, Rabbi Lezer decided to make a stand, and he thinks the same here. So I'm not telling anybody that they should go to Israel or whatever. But those are conversations. If that's something you want, that you have to let it be known, right? I know of a case of somebody where the person died suddenly during COVID, and they're going to bury in the place, and the brother came along and says, he always told me he wanted to go to Israel, always told me. And the wife said, he never said that to me, it wasn't written down, we're burying him here. There's all sorts of other complications that we're going to go through. If you get buried in Israel and nobody goes to visit you, whereas if you're buried near your family and people go to see you, which is supposed to be some honor for the dead, they get some benefit that you go regularly, whether or just on the yard site and daven there. There is some benefit to that, and that's important. So these things need to be discussed as a family to decide where you want to be buried, and if you can't go ahead and make the arrangements and pay for the arrangements ahead of time, even better, because that's also, first of all, it's good business advice anyway. I had somebody who lived till 97. It's quite funny, because the rabbi's fees now have gone up. I won't tell you what it is, but it's nice. And the funeral home told me this person paid in 1991, so we're talking about 22 years ago, and they said,
30 plus years ago.
So they said, put it this way, we're making a bigger loss on this one. Put it that way, right? Because they paid full price then, so it makes a lot of sense financially. Well, prices are going up and up and up and up, and so on. I will finish with a plug, and I'm not being paid to make this plug. I'm going to make this plug. There are lots of funeral homes out there that advertise that they are Jewish, but don't do things as we would want. The biggest thing is they close at 5:00, and then you can't get hold of anybody, or they won't pick up anybody after hours. To me, that's a huge no-no, right? That's a big issue, and so on. So there are, any funeral home that Jewish funeral home that advertises they do burials and cremations, I would definitely stay away from them. But, as I say, I'm not being paid to make this plug. Maybe I should tell them, because I've got them a lot of business over the years. The Neshama organization, based in South Florida, right? They're amazing. I've had people die, and they pick them up within 45 minutes. I had somebody who died out of Shabbos. They were there. They used the goy out of Shabbos just in case it was going to be late. It's interesting, fascinating. They don't pick up on Shabbos, but for the Erev Shabbos, they used the goy in case he got back late. They came out. They were there. They get arrangements. I've had people tell me, "Oh, Rabbi, we can't do for 3 days the airlines," and I call in the Neshama. It's always politically charged when you do that, and money and finance, but they work very well. And they say, "Yeah, we've got a flight this afternoon." So, because certain funeral homes only work with certain airlines, huh?
That's the place on Federal Highway in Pompano Beach.
Correct. Yeah. Yes.
The old church.
Well, they moved. They used to be on the edge of the highway. Then they moved recently. Yeah. So their organization are amazing. I've had amazing experience with them. I also believe they're the cheapest around. And if you're looking for a cemetery, I recommend the South Florida Jewish Cemetery. 3 reasons. Number 1, I think it is the cheapest around, right? Number 2, they have full Kavuras Yisrael. Everybody who works in that place, from the grave diggers to everybody else, is Jewish, which is a big merit, that everything is done by the Jews, by a Jewish person, and so on. Every little aspect of everything. And the third thing is they don't bury in these vaults that they do in South Florida. So in South Florida, you go to a cemetery, you'll see they put the coffin in a concrete stuff. They built the cemetery up 3 feet. They added extra mud, so they bury mamish in the ground as the way it should be. In fact, I've had to sign because they have sections for religious, Shema Shabbos, non-Shema Shabbos, which again is a very ancient way of doing it. Tzaddikim get buried next to Tzaddikim. Anyway, so I've had to sign that certain people are Shema Shabbos. In one case, they're not Shema Shabbos, so they go to the non-Shema Shabbos section. And people were not very pleased with me. Anyway, that's some of the things rabbis get in trouble for. Yes, Rabbi, will you sign that I'm Shomer Shabbos and I can be buried in the Shomer Shabbos section? But you're not. So, anyway, that was an interesting thing. But, so yeah, that's what I would advise for those who are in South Florida. And even those who are not in South Florida, who are not going to get buried in that cemetery, I would advise to use the Neshama organization. They get people up to all sorts of places in the quickest. And even in COVID, when flights were not happening, they would drive people. They drove people in vans, ordinary vans, up to New York to be buried. So they really go the extra mile. So I am going to plug them. Okay, bit of a morbid feel to the share. So I'll just end off with a positive note, and that this week's Parsha is called Vayechi Yaakov. Yaakov lived 17 years. They say that those 17 years of his life were the best years of his life. So I thought, how can we relate that to modern day us, right? So you have snowbirds, right? You're retired. Well, maybe not in your case yet, but you're retired, you come down, you're in Florida. Sometimes people say these are the best years of your lives, but you have to make them useful, right? Think about your legacy. Yaakov thought about his legacy. He blessed his children. He instructed him, right? And this is not a plug for tzedakah, for my shul, and for putting your names on things, or any of those sort of stuff, right? That's not the aim of what I'm doing. But it's the time, snowbird life, people tell me it's great. Baruch Hashem, people go around with their kids, grandchildren, all this sort of stuff, and they feel amazing, Baruch Hashem, health permitting. And it is wonderful years. Yaakov had a very difficult life. But the last 17, when he was in Egypt, out of Edge as well, in Egypt, were the best of his life. So I'm not going to use the word waste, make the most of it. It's a time that you can do a bit more learning, a bit more chesed, a bit more deeds, right? When you're not working so much, you don't have the pressures and stresses of raising the children and stuff and things like that, to think about your legacy, think about what is going to happen when you come to Shamayim? What are they going to say to you? How are you going to earn yourself extra brownie points, right? And I'm not talking about taking on huge things. And I'm not talking about spending hours a day learning and giving all your money away to tzedakah. No. Few little small things, right? Whether it's getting involved in a chesed organization, helping out. And when I say helping out, I mean helping out for the right reasons, okay? Whatever that means, right? Some people get involved because they want to get involved. They want to be the big shot, and they want to be, but get involved for altruistic reasons, right? Because you want to just do chesed, you want to help out, and so on. And in that marriage, and that schos, like Yaakov Avinu loy meis, he didn't die, which, of course, he did die, right? We saw they buried in there. So they say, loy tam misa, he didn't feel the experience of death. Why? Because he had Yosef there, he had all his children there, they took over from him, right? So it's as if he's still living through his children, his life still goes on, and so on and so forth. And on that note, I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbos, and if Mashiach hasn't come in the next 30 hours, 36 hours, I wish everybody an easy fast. Okay, I forgot to look. Did anybody put any chats in? Anyone put any chats? Top chats. No, nobody put any chats in. Okay, nice, not chatting with you. Okay, have a good night. Okay, are we ready to stop streaming?